And I suggest we talk openly and honestly. Let's listen to one another. Let's do as we say in the Middle East, let's talk DUGRI. That means straightforward. DUGRI, 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 DUGRI.
Good afternoon, New Yorkers, and good evening, Israeli citizens. I'm Jacob Kornblue from Brooklyn, New York, and welcome to the first episode of Let's Talk DUGRI podcast that will bring you in-depth analysis, opinion, and the latest updates from the Israeli Knesset elections taking place on January 22nd. Tonight, we will speak with Jeremy Sultan, a known Knesset blogger and political analyst, who will give us the latest from Israel, from the Likud primaries, how the Likud list will look, how Benjamin Netanyahu anticipates to lead Israel for the next 4 years, or maybe more, and what impact will the social media have on the Israeli elections. All this in my next conversation with Jeremy Sultan from Israel. With us on the phone is Jeremy Sultan. His blog is very well known in the political world in Israel, KnessetJeremy.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me, Jacob.
First, for those who are not aware with the political aspect in Israel, following Operation Pillar of Defense, Israel went back into election mode, and as a matter of fact, today Likud is holding its primary for the Knesset list. We know, Jeremy, that there are some complications there. Voters were standing in the line for a few hours. The computer system wasn't working. What's the latest update?
Well, I can tell you that I went to the polling station that is near my home, and there was actually no lines, and things were moving very, very swiftly, I should say. There have been reported problems in Jerusalem, in Ma'ale Adumim, in Tel Aviv, in other selected areas. But for the most part, most of the polling stations do seem to be working without any glitches. The places where there are issues are places where there are large amounts of people voting. And that is something that has kept the voting percentage down throughout the day. You can have, out of the 130 polling stations, you can have a situation where 100 of them are fine, but if 30 of them, the 30 that have the most people voting in them, they have situations where the computers are down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, you're going to have a lot of disgruntled people go home. The latest is they've decided to push off the closing hour, the deadline of Likud primary from 10 p.m. to midnight local time. And right now they are examining if they have the funds and the manpower to have a second day of primaries.
Latest had 28% of Likud members voting in the primary as of 6:40 p.m. in Israel time. Is that precedent?
That is about where it was at the previous cycle. However, there are a lot more Likud members this cycle than there was last cycle. And the new members are expected to be people who want to be very involved, and people are expecting to have a much higher turnout this cycle than you did in the previous one. So you might get to a situation where I expect that we're going to pass over 50% of the vote by the time we get to midnight, and they're going to have to make a decision, again, based on funds and based on manpower, if in order to try to get an extra 10 to 15% of the vote out, if they want to go ahead and go through a second day of this. My estimation is they don't. The amount of money that it costs to have one day of primaries is astronomical. This is the largest day in terms of a bill that any party gets over an entire cycle. To go through 2 days of this is not something that I expect Likud to want to do.
Do you expect any surprises coming out from this primaries?
Yeah, I don't see Silvan Shalom finishing in the top 5. I don't see Yuval Steinitz finishing in the top 5. I don't see Bogi Ya'alon finishing in the top 5. Benny Begin, who finished in the top 5 last time, will most definitely not finish in the top 5 this time. If you're asking the people that I see in the top 5 this time, it's going to be some of the same familiar names. It's going to be Gideon Sa'ar, it's going to be Gilad Ardan, it's going to be Yisrael Katz. Those are names that I expect to see at the top of the list. To go ahead and to try to predict some of the other spots there in the top 5, we'll wait and see. But I think the picks that I'm willing to give is a lot more that you're going to see from most people making their picks tonight. In terms of ministers that aren't going to be able to make the top 20 and come back for the next Knesset term, I don't expect to see Michael Eitan or Don Meridor make the top 20. I think their time is gone. However, other moderate Likud MKs, such as Benny Begin and Speaker Rivlin, I expect them to be able to make the cut.
Is there any difference of how the Likud slot will be viewed in the public, since Netanyahu already merged with Avigdor Lieberman and he's perceived, at least in the view of the media, as an extreme right? How will Benjamin Netanyahu, viewed as a centrist, push forward in this election with such a list?
Well, I think that no matter any point in Netanyahu's career, he's always been called a right-wing extremist by many people within the left and the media. I don't think that joining Avigdor Lieberman on a joint ticket, a joint faction, is going to make things any different. I remind the listeners that Likud is having their party have their primaries separate than Avigdor Lieberman. Yisrael Beitenu still exists as a party, so does Likud. They're just having a joint ticket. They're going to have their same faction. I think Netanyahu is going to do what he always does before election time, and that's move towards the center. That's how you win elections. And a decision to go for a ceasefire in the aftermath of a Tel Aviv bus bombing, well, I'm sorry, if that's right-wing extremism, then I got to say people really have stopped learning how to read a political map.
Yeah, I wanted to get to this. Following the ceasefire, what ramifications would it have on the Likud particular and on the right-wing bloc? Do you anticipate?
So the answer is yes. You brought up a couple points there. I'll start with the last point. Yair Lapid right now is dropping. On my blog, KnessetJeremy.com, you can see the Knesset Jeremy weekly average, where I average all of the polls. The person who's lost the most ground in the last week is Lapid's Yesh Atid party. They've fallen down from 13 seats, which was their average last week, to 11.1 this week. And if you take in scenario polls that were taken of Livni and her new party, he falls to 4 or 5 seats in those two scenario polls. So it's very obvious to Lapid, if he wants to continue in politics and actually survive the electoral threshold, he would need to go out and, for his survival, offer Livni the type of joint leadership, number 2 spot. She can bring in her people into his party type deal, because without that, he would totally wash away. The thing is that Lapid is still a relative political newbie, and Tzipi Livni understands that if she's higher in the polls, if she waits longer, her price will continue to go up, and she might even be able to buy Yair Lapid for a discount price and have him as her number 2. However, that's not going to happen because of Lapid's ego, but that might not be something that Livni has learned yet. Livni is meeting with Sheli Yachimovich, she's meeting with Ehud Olmert, she's meeting with Yair Lapid. She doesn't really seem like a person who wants to start her own party. And that's much to the dismay of former Kadima MKs who really hope that she does. Everybody's waiting to hear what she wants to do, what she's going to do. The final answer we'll only know on December 6th, in another week and a half, when they give the final lists to the Central Election Committee. But in terms of the first point that you were bringing up, listen, when votes move around in the right camp, that doesn't hurt Netanyahu. He can afford to go to the center, lose some seats to people like Naftali Bennett and the upcoming merger on the joint ticket of the Jewish Home and National Union list, because they're going to support him and his candidacy for prime minister after the elections finish, no matter what. We saw this in the last cycle. Tzipi Livni at the head of Kadima got 28 seats. Likud was the second largest party with 27 seats. And it didn't matter. Likud still had a 65-seat right-wing bloc, and when 65 MKs are going to the president saying, we want Netanyahu to be prime minister, Netanyahu is going to be prime minister. So the one thing here that could happen that Netanyahu would not like is that he does lose some seats to Bennett. However, he has less seats to give out to his own ministers, to his own MKs. Also, he needs to look out for Yisrael Beitenu now that they're in a joint faction. There's a lot of things that he's going to have to deal with internally, but in terms of him becoming the next prime minister, that's not a danger.
Do you expect, it's of course a theoretical question, but do you expect Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to, if he wins this election, another 3-4 years from now say, listen, I was Prime Minister as long almost as David Ben-Gurion, I did what I needed to do in my political career, I'm stepping down before the elections and let somebody in the Likud take over power?
You know, that's something that people asked 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, Bibi said, I'm not so sure that I'm going to want to run for a third term for prime minister. And we see that he did. So I think the same thing is going to happen. If he thinks it's viable to get a fourth term as prime minister, I think that he'll go for it. To go beyond a fourth term, I mean, that's something that I think is really pushing the envelope, because already at that point you have people within your own party who've waited long enough, and you'll have an inheritance battle that starts ripping his party from within. So I could see him going to a fourth term, but that would most definitely be his max.
Now I want to turn you to a point that was made during Operation Pillar of Defense, and that was the social media war, how the IDF and other Israeli PR companies managed to shift the conversation from TV, from press, from print paper to social media. And they had some sort of success in broadening the conversation, and YouTube clips, tweets from Gaza and from Israel. All this created something new to the conversation, and it really helped out Israel on that front. Now, as you are aware of, the social media played a very effective role in the 2012 presidential elections. Some even say it was a little too much. Do you see in Israel that Twitter is not so popular, YouTube is basically used for uploading music tracks? Do you see Israeli voters engaging in social media discussions that could have an impact on elections? And do you see some outlets that could overcome the media bias by communicating via social media?
Well, I'll tell you that when it does come to social media in Israel, we're definitely in a situation that we've been slow. We've been slow on the political end. Roni Rimon, who was the campaign manager for Netanyahu and the Likud in 2009, really tried very hard to engage in both social media and YouTube campaigning, and it's just not something that worked out pretty well. Kadima also tried. Kadima had this video of these two naked women, and I don't think they got more than 10,000 hits. But if you go ahead and you draw a contrast and you look at what's happening today in 2013, Zev Elkin came out with his Elkin-style video for his primary bid. This isn't even like the general election Likud video, and he's gotten over 70,000 hits last time I checked. So I think there is a little bit of a move on that front. I don't know if it'll be as involved as we saw in the American elections, because it was definitely a very, very big presence on the overall picture. But I do think if you're looking at the pie of where the campaign is going to be fought, I think the social media will have a much larger piece of that pie than they did in the previous election.
Now, since you write in English and there's a big chunk of the electorate in Israel that speak English, do you see English media also picking up in this election, and who should people look out for when they are seeking on-time updates or scoops when it comes to the Knesset elections, other than you?
Right. I was going to say, you're giving me a chance to self-plug there. Mm-hmm. But besides myself, there's definitely a lot of options that you did not have in 2009. In 2009, you had the Jerusalem Post, and you had Arutz Shev in English. Today, you also have the Times of Israel. You have the Jewish Press that has their headquarters here in Israel and have been doing a great job in terms of covering the events here. So, in addition, you do have Haaretz English that doesn't have much, but when it comes to election time, they do try to provide more. So in terms of the mainstream media, those are really the 5 places that you're going to be able to find stuff online. In terms of the papers itself, the Jerusalem Post is the only place that comes out here in actual paper. You also, though, have the Torah Tidbits that has had a lot of advertising this cycle for a lot of the primaries, and I expect the general election campaign will be no different. The Torah Tidbits goes out to about 12,000 English speakers every week. It's a weekly paper, and it's distributed within synagogues. And I know a lot of people, they spend more time reading the Torah Tidbits than their prayer book. So it definitely is a good place to place ads. There are a bunch of bloggers that are doing things that were not around in the last cycle. So I think there's a lot more addresses for the English speakers. I also think that the Anglo vote is something that's now being courted a lot more heavily than in previous campaigns. After I Vote Israel came out with the fact that there is about 250,000 people that were eligible to vote in the U.S. elections, and that's not even including Canada, Great Britain, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, etc., that this Anglo vote, this English-speaking vote, is actually something that is pretty large, and it's something that a lot of people are starting to take a lot of interest in. And I'm starting to see that, the Likud has their Anglo division, Yisrael Beitenu does, the Jewish Home does, Yesh Atid does. I think just about any single party that respects itself is going to have an English-speaking campaign, and that is, again, in a contrast to the previous election cycle.
Any specific troublemaker?
A lot of the candidates that are English speakers, that are Anglos, that are finding themselves on lists, whether they're in realistic or non-realistic spots, I think they're taking a lot of heat. For whatever reason, there is a lot of negativity that is being sent towards a lot of these people because, for instance, on the right side, there are a lot of people that have a lot of hostility towards the United States because they're unhappy with the fact that it seems that Israel is their puppet. And when they see someone speaking English, they don't really want to see that person representing them, so they're going to go ahead and try to slam them. On the left side, you a lot of times have the other type of thing happening, that it's not proper for someone who's a dual citizen of an English-speaking ally and an Israeli citizen to be able to hold 2 hats, and because of that, they're going ahead and smacking them. I think that one thing that people should be able to do is, across the political spectrum, respect that there are people who speak English who are trying to help on a public relations diplomacy level by taking spots, even if they're not realistic, on these lists to explain their party's platform to the internet and beyond.
Jeremy Sultan from KnessetJeremy.com, was a pleasure having you, and I hope to have a updated analysis next week when we speak again.
Sounds great. Looking forward. Thank you, Jacob.
Have a good evening.
You too.